From legendary unsinkable ships to epic battles on the seas, the Canadian Navy has been on countless missions to liberate Europe one torpedo at a time, and it hardly gets any better than their surface ships. But which one of them has the best stories? Join us as we unveil the secrets behind some of Canada's most famous sea titans. But what's a better way to start than the HCMS Athabascan G07? Despite a relatively short service of 14 months before its tragic sinking, the Athabascan will definitely go down in history as one of the most iconic ships to come out of the Canadian Navy, and will be remembered fondly for the ship's service and the bravery of its crew. As a proud tribal-class destroyer, she was designed for speed, maneuverability, and offensive power, which made her a key asset in various naval operations, including World War II, where she protected convoys and conducted offensive operations against German shipping and U-boats. Launched on November 18, 1941, and commissioned on the 3rd of February 1943, the Athabascan was built by Vickers Armstrongs in Newcastle to be tough and pack a punch. Her design focused on speed and firepower. With a length of 377 feet and a displacement of about 2,500 tons, she was a titan on the seas. The hull was built from welded steel, which provided a good balance between durability and speed, while the ship's sleek, elongated shape allowed for fast movement through rough seas. The ship could reach speeds of up to 36.5 knots, about 42 miles per hour, allowing it to chase down enemy vessels. But hey, she wasn't all about chasing. The Athabascan was armed to the teeth and capable of dealing with enemies in the air, on the sea, and underwater. Carrying 6 4.7-inch 120mm dual-purpose guns and 3 twin mounts that could be used against both surface targets and aircraft, gave her significant firepower and versatility in combat situations. For more anti-aircraft defense, she was equipped with twin 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns and several 20mm Oerlikon cannons. She had 4 21-inch torpedo tubes to take on other cruisers and battleships, and in case you were a submarine trying to attack from under, the Athabascan had depth charges and anti-submarine mortars, both of which were critical for dealing with enemy submarines, especially in the volatile Atlantic waters where German U-boats were a constant threat. Her armament made her a formidable surface vessel, capable of taking on multiple roles in offensive and defensive operations. Even though the Athabascan was only operational for a few months, she took part in a number of escort and offensive operations, including raids against German shipping and convoy protection in the English Channel. One of her key battles occurred in 1943, when she participated in a daring raid near Ussant, France, alongside her sister ship, HMCS Haida. During this operation, they engaged German torpedo boats, sinking one and damaging others, highlighting her offensive abilities. On August 27, 1943, in the Bay of Biscay, the Athabascan survived a bombing attack carried out by German planes. In the attack, a glide bomb narrowly passed through the ship and out the starboard before exploding. Although the ship was damaged and the attack led to the death of the lead cook and some officers, with some of the crewmates sustaining injuries, not only did the Athabascan survive the attack, but under the command of an injured officer, John Gordon, they were able to rescue the surviving crew of the HMS Egret, which was also a victim of the attack, but unfortunately sunk. After the rescue, the Athabascan crew continued on to Devonport for repair. Alas, her tragic end came on the 29th of April 1944, 3 days after she had assisted in the sinking of a German torpedo boat. On the fateful day of its sinking, during a nightmare naval operation, the Athabascan came into a confrontation with German destroyers T-24 and T-27. She was struck by a torpedo from the T-24, causing an explosion in the engine room. The damage was catastrophic, and the ship began sinking rapidly. Despite the bravery of the crew, many lives were lost. Out of a crew of 261, 128 crew members were killed, and 83 were taken prisoner by the Germans. Her sister ship, Haida, managed to rescue 44 survivors, who were pulled from the water before Haida had to retreat while under fire from the Germans. One of those killed in action was the commanding officer, Lieutenant Commander John Stubbs, who heroically declined rescue to swim back and rescue more of his crew. This incident marked a dark chapter in the otherwise heroic service of the Athabascan. Looking back, the Athabascan's strength came from her speed, firepower, and versatility. She was effective in raids, convoy protection, and engagements with enemy vessels. Her downfall, however, came from the inherent vulnerabilities in her design. The lack of substantial armor made her vulnerable to torpedo fire. As a result of this weakness, she couldn't withstand a direct hit from the German torpedo boat during her final mission. The wreckage of the HMCS Athabaskan was located near the island of Bats in the English Channel in 2002, and is currently under the legal protection of the French Heritage Code. Up next, though, is Canada's finest ship. A well-deserved name in my opinion. What else would you call a ship that took part in 2 wars, was never sunk or severely damaged, and during World War II sank more enemy surface tonnage than any other Canadian warship? She was basically the Superman equivalent of Canadian ships. I'm of course referring to the HMCS Haida, the very ship that engaged in the rescue of 44 survivors of the ill-fated Athabaskan while under fire. This was not the only achievement the Haida was known for, but more on that later. First, let's dive into the design of this legendary ship. As another tribal-class destroyer, which was designed to be powerful and versatile, Haida was optimized for fleet and convoy protection. At 377 feet in length and displacing 1,927 tons, she was slightly larger than previous destroyers, enabling her to carry more armament and withstand damage in combat. Haida's hull was primarily constructed from steel, which was typical for warships of the time. The hull was designed for speed, flexibility, and combat. Her decks were reinforced with steel and armored in some areas to protect important parts of the ship from shellfire and explosions. Her superstructure was also built from steel, with an emphasis on housing weapon systems and radar installations while maintaining a relatively light design for maneuverability. And guess what? She was one of the fastest ships in the Royal Canadian Navy during World War II, with an advanced propulsion system for its time. Her engines were powered by 2 Parsons-geared steam turbines, which were fed by 3 Admiralty-type 3-drum boilers, which produced steam at high pressure. Plus, she had 2 propellers, one on each side, powered by the steam turbines. The twin-screw configuration provided better maneuverability and allowed for greater propulsion power to be spread across 2 shafts. With her propulsion system, she could reach a top speed of 36.5 knots, which was essential for quick engagements with enemy vessels, rapid repositioning during battles, and effective convoy escort duties. At a cruising speed of about 15 knots, HMCS Haida had an operational range of roughly 5,700 nautical miles, allowing her to operate in extended missions across the Atlantic and in other naval theaters, though she still required frequent refueling on long journeys. One thing I love about her, though, is how she packed a lot of firepower and could punch well above her weight. The HMCS Haida was equipped to handle a variety of combat situations, focusing on anti-aircraft and anti-submarine warfare, a very good use of her speed with which she could chase down and hunt enemy vessels. She was armed with 4 4.7-inch 120mm guns and twin turrets. These dual-purpose guns could be used against surface targets, as well as anti-aircraft defense. She also had one 4-inch gun for additional power. In those days, you could never have enough guns on your ship. She also had twin-mounted 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns and several 20mm Oerlikon cannons to fight off planes. And for any threats that came from under, she had anti-submarine depth charges and a Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar designed to destroy submarines before they could get within range. Finally, 2 quadruple 21-inch 533mm torpedo tubes were also mounted on the ship, giving it the ability to attack larger enemy vessels and warships. Armed to the teeth, fast, and built tough, it's no wonder the Haida had a very successful campaign and survived 2 wars. In 1944, under the command of Commander Henry de Wolf, Haida became famous for its role in the destruction of several German ships. Between April and September of 1944 alone, it sank 9 enemy ships. One of its famous English Channel operations was Operation Hostile in April 1944, when it sank multiple German destroyers and E-boats, including Z-32. Her skillful use of depth charges and coordination with other ships also contributed to the destruction of German U-boat 971 in June 1944. The Haida was involved in the sinking of 14 ships during the Second World War, and is the last survivor of the 27 tribal-class destroyers, 13 of which, including the HMCS Athabaskan, were lost during the Second World War. Of the over 400 Canadian warships from the Second World War, she is one of the only 3 surviving ships. At the time, Canada's Navy was the 3rd largest in the world. She is also the only survivor of 8 Canadian warships that served during the Korean War from 1950 to 1953. The Haida survived more than any other ship in Canada's Navy. She was practically invincible, and well deserved her title of Canada's finest ship. Currently, she is a National Historic Site and a museum ship on the Hamilton waterfront of Hamilton's Naval Reserve Division. And if you're a Navy lover like me, I would recommend visiting for a tour. This next ship from the Canadian Navy we're going to be talking about is also a survivor from World War II, and is also currently a National Historic Site and a museum ship. Before we call her name though, have you ever wondered how the Flower-class corvettes came about? It's simple. They were commissioned and mass-produced to meet the urgent demand for convoy escorts in the early stages of World War II. These ships were relatively small and lightweight, measuring about 205 feet in length on average, with a displacement of approximately 950 tons. They were constructed from steel, and their design was based on pre-war whaling ships, which gave them stability in rough seas, but also meant they were not particularly fast or heavily armored compared to the destroyers. Their original purpose was to escort and protect other ships, but as the war progressed, they became crucial in anti-submarine warfare. In those days, if you were an Allied ship, the German U-boats were a massive threat, and these corvettes helped tilt the scales of the war in favor of the Allied forces, and were crucial in their victory in the Battle of the Atlantic. Personally though, I can't help but feel the Sackville was one of the most special of this type. Not only has there ever only been one vessel named with the name in the Royal Canadian Navy, she is also the only surviving Flower-class corvette. And yes, it was also featured on a 45-cent stamp issued by Canada Post in 1988. The HMCS Sackville was built by St. John Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company in St. John, New Brunswick. She was launched on May 15, 1941, and commissioned into the Royal Canadian Navy on December 30, 1941. Like other Flower-class corvettes, she was designed to be simple and fast to construct. However, due to its whale-catcher design, Sackville and other corvettes had a reputation for poor handling in rough seas. They were known to pitch and roll dramatically in heavier weather. Imagine how difficult life was for the crew. They also weren't designed to be as fast as most ships and had relatively low range. The Sackville was primarily constructed from riveted steel, had a length of 205 feet, a speed of 16 knots, and about 30 km per hour, and a small crew of 85. Are you starting to see why she was so loved? Her armaments were optimized for submarine warfare, as German U-boats were a major threat to the Allied forces. Her main gun was a 4-inch, 102mm QFMK-9 naval gun, mounted at the bow. She also came equipped with twin-mounted 20mm Oerlikon cannons, which were light anti-aircraft guns for low-flying planes. And for anti-submarine warfare, she was fitted with depth charge throwers and racks, enabling her and her crew to engage U-boats by dropping the charges over the stern. She also had a Hedgehog anti-submarine mortar, a forward-firing weapon that launched small explosives that detonated on contact with the submarine, allowing Sackville to attack U-boats before they got within torpedo range. The HMCS Sackville was actively engaged in convoy escort duties from its commission in December of 1941 until the end of the war. During this period, she helped escort over 1,000 vessels and fought multiple U-boat attacks on several occasions. In one instance, while escorting convoy ON-115 in August 1942, she assisted in repelling at least 3 U-boats and damaging all of them within a 48-hour period. One of her most notable engagements occurred in August 1944, when she was involved in a series of skirmishes against U-boats while escorting a convoy. She successfully attacked several U-boats during this period, contributing to the disruption of the German naval blockade and helping to secure safe passage for the convoy. The Sackville's contributions are remembered as part of Canada's proud naval history, and proof that sometimes it's not the size of the dog in the fight that matters, but the size of the fight in the dog. From daring destroyers to steadfast corvettes, Canada's naval forces proved that when it comes to defending liberty, they were more than ready to take on the waves and anything the enemy threw at them. These ships carried the hopes of a nation and helped turn the tide in the war for freedom. Whether they were outgunning enemy destroyers or protecting vital convoys, their legacy sails on. Thank you for joining me on this voyage through history. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay up to date with more cool videos. Feel free to drop anchor in the comments below with your thoughts. Until next time.